Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome back to the Ebb and Space. I haven't been here a while because, quite frankly, I've been busy and a bit under the weather, but I'm back because there are three stories in the news that I just can't resist right now. And, well, let's see if I get through all three of them, but the first one has to do with Jonathan Frakes. You know, our favorite Captain Riker or Lieutenant Riker, or First Officer Riker of Star Trek TNG. So Jonathan Frakes, meanwhile, still feels that Code of Honor should be removed from rotation. It was racist in 1987, he feels, and it's racist now. When Frakes was told by his interviewer that Code of Honor was still readily available on Paramount Plus, Hulu, and several other streaming platforms, he was a little shocked. So Jonathan Frakes wants a racist episode of Star Trek removed. When I saw that headline, I immediately knew what episode he meant. I immediately knew it was Code of Honor. Without even clicking on that article, I knew it was Code of Honor. To be fair, they've spoken out against this episode before, so it wasn't really a shock that they were doing that now, but it was still pretty much off the top of my head, Code of Honor. So for those who don't really know what Code of Honor is, if you're not a Star Trek fan, but first let me say, Code of Honor, which initially aired in 1987, follows the Enterprise D to the planet Lygon 2, where the inhabitants, audiences are told, abide by strict rule. In an unwise creative choice, the Lygonians were dressed to resemble essentially African tribesmen. Yeah, stereotypes out of the 1940s. The Lygonian king, Luton, because it gets worse, he kidnapped Lieutenant Tasha Yar and forced her to fight his wife Urena to a death duel, because he wanted to get rid of his wife. So basically, this black African king kidnapped a blonde white woman in an effort to get rid of his black wife and replace her with this blonde white woman. In addition to the stereotypes, there's a lot of sexist language in Code of Honor because apparently Picard plays along with Luton's misogyny. It's one of the low point of the series, and all the cast members have said this throughout the years. It's one of the low point of the series. It is awful. And, but really, the tribesman stuff, the black man who kidnaps the blonde white woman and try to replace his wife with her, all of that is bad. But this episode touched upon something that I've noticed, and many people have noticed historically, and it is this default white human being type of trope, where often people of European descent portray themselves as the normal human being, and non-white people are portrayed as the abnormal human beings. And this is especially true if they practice so-called traditional, quote-unquote, primitive cultures. We see this is usually done with Indigenous American people, where Indigenous American people are basically made to basically come across as a mythological race. See, for example, the indigenous tribe in Neverland, Peter Pan. This is completely weird, where I've seen many people speak out against this in the past, including indigenous people, about them basically being compared to mythological creatures or alien races. And this was another one of those episodes that played with this, where it literally took African tribes people and made them alien. And I'm not talking about, often where you will have members of a European-based ethnicity or culture who then colonize an alien planet or end up in, a magical world. So, in the episode with Beverly Crusher, for example, where she visits her grandmother, who the colony where her grandmother lived, who had recently died, the colony was colonized by Scottish people. So they had many Scottish type customs because they were colonized by Scottish people. This was a case of humans from Earth picking up and moving to an alien planet. This is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is when they're portraying actual humans from Earth as literal aliens, often again with traditional cultures where they're just alien. They will go to an alien planet or a mythological world and they will just find Africans there being Africans. They'll just find indigenous people there being indigenous, not because these Africans or indigenous people colonized these planets, just because they're aliens. And it's the othering of these people, the portrayal of these people as an alien entity that is just not human. So, but anyway, this is a trope that this episode perfectly perfectly embodies this portrayal of non-white people, especially ones who practice tribal cultures, as just not being human. They're just aliens or mythological creatures. And it is an offensive episode on many levels. I am not sure I agree with Jonathan Frakes that it should be removed, but let me know what you think. If you think this should be removed from all streaming services, something tells me if you try to do that, it will just make people want to save it more. And somehow it will end up on the internet, one way or the next. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about, and this one is a little, because I don't really care for these topics all that much, because they're very, very political. And I'm worried that I just am not very politically correct. I'm worried I'm not politically correct, but this one is in the news. Elon Musk on Wednesday decided that he was going to ban the word cis or cisgender from Twitter. So what he wrote was, repeated targeted harassment against any account will cause the harassing accounts to receive at minimum temporary suspensions. The words cis or cisgender are considered slurs on this platform. Now, I've seen many people say, well, he doesn't mean that he's going to ban you if you use cis and cisgender, but that if you use it to harass someone, he will in fact, suspend your account. Okay. But this fueled a really major debate about what constitutes a slur. And many people have pointed out, this is Twitter. This is a platform where people use words like fascist and white supremacist and commie and communist and all these other terms. People use the N-word. People use a lot of actual slurs, clever ways around them, but many of those accounts do not get banned. Cisgender is tricky because most people don't know what this means. Most people have no idea what cis or cisgender means, but hey, it's being used, and I've seen that people cannot agree, even those who don't like the term, myself included, cannot agree that it's a slur. Personally, I don't think it's a slur. Do I think it's ideological language? Yes. And that's my disagreement with it, because it takes an ideological stance that I don't personally agree with. That is, I don't agree with labeling people cis men and cis women who did not approve of that, especially women who did not approve to be prefixed, and the ideological stance behind this, which is the belief that there are multiple types of women or different types of women as opposed to just human females. So it's a very political thing, and I understand that. And the thing is, with slurs, any word can become a slur. Any word can become a slur if you weaponize it that way. So I'm not sure. I don't think he means he's going to ban people if you use cisgender. I've seen people type in cisgender over and over again, but test in the censors. But I don't think he means he's going to ban you if you use cisgender. I think he means if you use it to harass someone, to openly go after someone and use it as a slur against someone repeatedly, then you will be suspended if the person complains. But then again, that also means you should probably not refer to anyone as cisgender, especially if that person tells you, I don't want to be called that. I've seen accounts being like, J.K. Rowling is cisgender, intentionally, again, testing the censors. J.K. Rowling has made it clear she does not want to be called a cis woman. So if you insist on doing that over and over, that's when you get suspended. You might not agree with it, but yes, not everyone agrees with this prefix. And I've briefly touched upon these types of academically top-down terminology before. The one I really touched upon was Latinx, Latinx, which it came out of academia, but does not work in Latin languages because Latin languages are sexed, and most people of Latin American heritage do not like the term. And not only do they not like it and never use it, but many of them have flat out said in polling after polling, we find this term offensive. And despite this, it's still being used in academic circles, in governments, even though the majority of Latin American people don't care for it, never use it. Because it's, as I said, language needs to germinate naturally from within a population upwards. The words become popular and then they move gradually upwards. But this is not the case with a lot of these activist academic language, like Latinx, like cisgender, like, assigned sex at birth. They're being pushed from the top up onto people. It's a kind of forced speech. And most of them, contrary to popular belief, are not harmless or neutral. They're ideological. So there's a lot of pushback against a lot of this. And I personally, agree that they shouldn't be forced onto people who never agreed to them. But at the same time, I don't think it's a slur. I mean, again, any word can be a slur if you use it that way. So hopefully no one gets kicked off Twitter for using cisgender unless you're intentionally weaponizing it against someone that you don't like. And especially if that person has stated repeatedly, don't use that term for me. But let me know what you think about Elon Musk basically labeling cisgender and cis a slur. Although one other thing, what I do like about this is it's forcing a conversation, because what I've been aggrieved about in the last few years is the way that quote unquote woke terminology and ideological viewpoints are just defaulted onto people, that no one gets a choice to debate it, to question it. It's just kind of, you accept it, or we're going to ruin you, and we're going to censor you, we're going to block you. I'm not a fan of that. And the beauty of people like Elon Musk and J.K. Rowling is they're so famous. They're so, pop famous that it's difficult to ignore them. It's difficult to ignore them. Even if you want to ignore them, you can't ignore them. And I like that because they're forcing people to have conversations that should have been had years ago. And many people still don't want to have these conversations, but you can't ignore that these conversations are happening. I just saw a news story about England, where in the UK, if you think your government isn't discussing a topic that you feel is important, you can sign a petition, and if that petition reaches a certain number, the government has to debate it in Parliament. And I like that idea, because there's a lot of disconnect between the political elite and the people who run everything, and the people who have to deal with the fallout from those policies and laws. So I like that people like Elon Musk and J.K. Rowling can force a debate that really they shouldn't have to, but they're doing it. They're doing it, and I like that. So whether certain people want to have this debate or not, this debate is happening, and it's overdue. Okay, so the third thing I wanted to touch upon, and this is the one really I'm not really all that interested in, but the so-called diversity czar at Disney is leaving. This is after, well, she quits. At least that's what we're told. She quit. You can speculate as to the reason, but here it's being speculated by the post-millennial, and take that with a grain of salt, that the reason is due to the failure of race swap movies like The Little Mermaid and the so-called non-binary Elemental movie. I've not seen Elemental. I've heard bad things about it, but honestly, I've not seen it. I've seen some aspect of The Little Mermaid, and I know about that, and you know how I feel about that, race swap characters, that I'm not supportive of this, because I do believe that non-white people we have our own cultures and mythologies and folklore and our own stories, and I believe that we should be promoting those instead of taking hand-me-down from white culture. But that's just how I personally feel. But anyway, the Disney diversity czar has quit, and I'm not surprised. This is a Black woman, because as I've said before, Black women have become the face of woke diversity, for better or worse. Unfortunately, this means a lot of the backlash against this woke diversity stuff will in fact come back to Black women. But unfortunately, I see a lot of people on, the culture critics celebrating this, because they're like, yeah, this is a win. Finally, there's backlash against this wokeness stuff that is permeating through our culture. But at the same time, well, is this really a win against so-called anti-woke stuff? Anti-woke critics targets the Oscars, but here's what the Academy's new diversity rules actually require. I swear I'm losing my ability to speak. So apparently some right-wing critics are erroneously saying that all nominees must meet an on-screen diversity requirement, which is just one of several standards that could be met for eligibility. Sorry, if you hear noise in my background, stuff's happening. But yeah, so the fear was that, it's going to require films to be racially diverse and have all kinds of, so-called minority representation on screen, even when it doesn't make sense. So for example, I've seen the Daily Mail mention that if the Gladiator was being made today exactly the same way, it wouldn't be eligible because it doesn't reach the quota for racial on-screen diversity. But it is apparently, according to this, technically not true. There is still a diversity quota, but it doesn't just target on-screen representation, it also targets off-screen representation. So it says, to be eligible for Best Picture for the Oscars next year, the ceremony's top prize, a film must meet 2 of 4 diversity standards. The first standard, which is standard A, it must come under fire, which is the one that came under fire. It can be met in one of 3 ways. Either a lead or significant supporting character is from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. At least 30% of the acting ensemble is from at least 2 underrepresented groups. So women, LGBTQ, disabled or deaf. Either that or they must be people from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. And 3, the storyline centers on an underrepresented group. It's a bit confusing, but basically, yeah, that. So I guess that means, if there are 10 members of the cast, 30% of them need to be from an underrepresented group, or, that kind of stuff. But yeah, God. This, of course, came around because of the weird Oscar So White backlash from a few years ago. I guess the fear many people here being referred to as right-wing critics have is that it's going to turn into a situation where it's like a movie about 10th century Vikings, and it will be racially diverse. But that's already happened. The TV show Vikings already has that weird where they have a Black woman Viking leader, which is just kind of very, very strange. But I guess that's the fear that people have, is that it's going to put completely nonsensical or quote unquote woke diversity, which is usually diversity for diversity's sake, as opposed to real authentic diversity. Yeah, so the standard B is the one that targets behind the screen stuff. So where they require at least 2 creative leaders or department heads, so casting directors, cinematographers, composers, to be from an underrepresented group, and at least 6 crew members or technical positions to be from an underrepresented group, or at least 30% of the crew must be from underrepresented groups. And then standard C is the film's production, distribution, and financing, which offer paid internship or apprenticeship and training opportunities for people from underrepresented groups. Standard D, the film studio must have multiple senior executives from underrepresented groups on its marketing, publicity, or distribution teams. So basically, for a film to be eligible, 2 of those 4 standards must be met. It doesn't need to meet all 4 of them. So it doesn't need, to have a film featuring Vikings in the 10th century be racially diverse. It doesn't need to have that. If this film will be monoracial, so everyone will be white, then it must meet one of the other 2 criterias, which is, the film production and distribution may have paid internship, or the people working on the crew must be 30% racially and ethnically or underrepresented group, and blah, 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 and blah. So, I suspected it wasn't exactly like that. And I know people think, well, it's going to force people to hire people who are not qualified. Probably, yes. But please don't just associate people who are not white with people who are not qualified. But we'll see how this turns out. I still feel a lot of this. The only one here that really I am okay with is the part about, internships and apprenticeships and training opportunities from underrepresented groups. I do like that, because I think that is proper equity, where instead of just taking people who are new because you need to meet a diversity quota, you actually give them the opportunities to train and work their way up into these companies and into these roles. Because if you do hire people who are inexperienced, it will show. And we've seen that a lot in a lot of cases where Disney does that, and it shows on Disney shows where a lot of the people they use are not properly trained and clearly have little or no training. It's like an on-the-job type of training. But anyway, that was the 3rd thing that I wanted to mention, this Hollywood diversity stuff and where it might be going. So for those celebrating Walt Disney's diversity czar quits, there is still the Oscars, and we don't know yet what the fallout of this is, but let's see. Anyway, those were my thoughts on this issue. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share. In the meantime, like, subscribe, share, and let me know what your thoughts are on these 3 issues. And let me know if you want me to cover anything else, because I'm okay with that as well.